Hi, this is James and I'd like to welcome you to my latest viewer requested video. In this video, I'm taking on a question I've been getting from a number of viewers lately, and the question is how I personally read a Lenormand Grand Tableau, specifically when the significator happens to fall into a tricky spot. That's how one viewer languaged it, and so that turns out to be when the significator happens to fall into one of the four corners of the Grand Tableau. So in this video, I'm going to be showing from different perspectives, using different examples of how I read the GT when the significator happens to fall into one of the four corners, as well as what happens when it falls into the essence line if you work with an 8x4 plus 4 GT. So the deck that's going to be assisting me for this video is one of my favorite Lenormand decks. I consider this to be my workhorse deck, meaning that I use it for personal readings and I use it for when I work with clients. And that deck is Fanu's Lilac Dondorf, and I will be leaving information about the deck in the description box below so you can learn more about it. And if you're like me and you have a collection of decks, you may want to add it to your collection. So again, I will be leaving information about that deck in the description box below. So now that I've talked about the subject for the video, I've talked about the inspiration for the video, and I talked about the deck that's going to be helping me for the video, let's now move to the table and take a closer look at the first example of how I work with a GT, specifically when the significator falls into one of the four corners. And here we have the first of a few possibilities in terms of the significator card being in a tricky position. So when the significator is in the first position of a Grand Tableau, this is how I would normally go about approaching it. So here I have an example Grand Tableau laid out, and in this particular case the lady is in the beginning of the tableau. So when this happens, and I read with direction in mind, so in my particular case the lady card is facing to the right. So all the cards that are to the right of her are all the future. So when I have a tableau and this is the scenario, this indicates there's a lot of future potential to look at because she is facing all the cards to her right. So the interesting thing, when the significator card is in the first position, in this particular case the back is to the left of the tableau, then there's no past here. So when you're doing this, we're looking at a lot of the future potential. The other thing to make note of is when it's the very first card in the line, I tend to look at all the cards that are below the significator as indicative of things that she has overcome or things that are underlying influences possibly in relation to the question being put to the cards. So those are a couple of ways of looking at that. So what I typically do is I tend to look at the row going forward because this is all the future, and I tend to look at the column that she is standing on top of because those are the present. Usually the axis of the tableau where the significator is represents some aspect of the present. So I would look at that. Another thing you could do is you could look at the diagonals. So in this particular case we have lady, we have letter, we have stork, and we have snake as possibilities for a diagonal, so you could do that. I'm not going to really go in depth in terms of what these all mean. I'm just basically pointing out how I would approach the scenario of having a significator as the first card. So another thing that would be a challenge, but you still could do it, is that you don't have enough cards when the significator is the first card to do a 9 card, but you still could read the 3 cards that are right directly touching her. So you could look at the second card because she's immediately facing that, so that would be the future. The card below it, because that would be in the 9 card, this would be the ending card, this would be the closing card in the 9 card box. So you could still look at that, and then you would look at the card that's directly below her. So it's a very short form of a 9 card. You would just be looking at the immediate cards that are touching her. you still could look at the immediate story. So I would still look at this as the first 3 cards for me usually are what's opening the tableau up, and they tell a story briefly. So here we have the lady facing sun. So we could read this as, you know, there's something coming up in which the lady may achieve some kind of success, because I tend to look at sun as success. There could be also something about the woman's confidence, because I tend to look at the sun card as confidence. So it could be describing her as a successful woman or a confident woman, or that she's going to be facing something that's going to allow her to achieve some kind of success or to feel a sense of confidence, right? And then mountain being the next card throws a little bit of a wrench in that, because mountain is a challenging card for me. I tend to look at it as a block, a challenge, an obstacle. So just briefly here, we have a situation, possibly where the woman's success is going to be blocked, or the woman's confidence is going to be blocked. There's going to be some challenge that's going to affect her ability to feel confident about achieving some kind of success. So that's how I would immediately read the first 3 cards. So you still could do that. Now, I'm looking at the tableau, and it just so happens that we have another possible scenario that we can take a look at even in this tableau. And I'm going to step around to the other side, because the gentleman card is also in a spot in a corner. So he's on the opposite side of the tableau, and this was random. So I love how this works out. So now we have another spot where a significator card has fallen. And now the interesting thing to note is that in this particular deck, I have 2 men cards. I have one facing to the right and one facing to the left. So the one that has appeared in this tableau is the one facing the left. So just like the lady card facing to the right, all these cards, because I read with direction in mind, all these cards to the left would be his future, because he's facing those, right? And again, any cards that would be behind him would be the past, but because he's at the end of the tableau in a corner, there are no cards here that represent the past. So again, we would be reading for his future. So now the interesting thing that I note, even in a hypothetical situation, here we have the gentleman facing book. So for me, this could represent me. If I go with the gentleman representing me, then this could be me facing a future project. Book can be about a project. This could also be a man who is knowledgeable, because book is knowledge. But the interesting thing, keeping in context with this very video, is that the book card for me can represent a reader and a deck of cards. So here we have the scenario where I'm showing or demonstrating something about how I personally read the cards. And I just find that very interesting, that that would randomly, and I'm doing finger quotes around that, randomly show up in the tableau. Now, if we go with that as the scenario, let's go back to the other side for a moment. And then the lady card could be saying too, this is for the 2 people who specifically asked me to present this kind of video, or asked me about questions pertaining to the significator being in a corner or a tricky spot in a tableau. Then the mountain could be the challenge with that situation, and helping the woman, or in this case the ladies, get over that, so they could feel a greater sense of success or confidence regarding that particular challenge. And I'm going to add the next card, because the stars is next to the mountain card, and for me, stars is a card that can represent divination. So it's very interesting to see that in the line like that. And then I could even go one step further. Heart is a card that can represent something that each of us, let's say the lady on the one side, the man on the other, each of us is passionate about. And so that would be the idea of reading the cards and wanting to become better at it. We're passionate about it, we're enthusiastic about it. But for me personally, the heart card is a card that can represent fans. So it would be fans, and fans are people who are just as passionate and just as enthusiastic about a topic as you are. So, but it's very interesting to note all of that, and that fits the context of the video itself, and this was a random throw. So again, when the card is in the first position, you want to take into account which way the significator card is facing, but typically you will find the significator facing to the right, and if that's the case, this is a scenario where there's going to be a focus on the future because there are no cards in the past, because this is the first card. And it would be the same way with the gentleman facing the left. It would be the exact same scenario. They're just mirroring each other in this regard, but it's the same situation. All right, so now let's take a look at another possibility. And here we are with the same tableau, but what I've done is I've reversed the gentleman and the lady cards. So I'm now going to talk about what would happen if the significator is in the opposite corner. We started in the first scenario looking at the lady in the opening of the tableau. But what will we look at is if she was in the opposite corner, if she was facing the right, but over to the very last column in the tableau. So this is the scenario. So now we have the lady card. She's facing to the right, and there are no cards here. So this would be the exact opposite of the first scenario. So what would happen is all these cards, because her back is to all these cards here would represent aspects of the past. And so that's a challenge, because 9 times out of 10 when you're doing a reading, you're tending to want to look at what's going on in the moment. You want to look at some past influences, but you also keenly want to see what could be potentially coming up in the future. So this would be a challenge for somebody who's asking a future-oriented question, because we have a situation in which the future is not open to us because there are no cards next to the lady card facing the right side. So again, we would have all these cards representative of the past, right? Again, the same situation would be she's standing at the very top in the corner. So again, all these cards could indicate below her aspects of the situation that she has either overcome, or some aspects of the question that are underlying influences or things that she is not consciously aware of. So the most significant column would be the last column, because that is where the significator card is. So you would want to take a look at the cards that are below her, because those are cards that represent the present. But interestingly enough, even though this is the row that could represent the present, the fact that her back, is to all these other cards, this would be past. All this. So this would be the immediate past, and then going, I tend to look at the card closest as the immediate past, and then each one removed becomes further and further in the distant past. So you would take a look at that. Again, you could do a diagonal, so you could take lady, and in this particular case, rider, garden, and tower, and those are all diagonal, so you could read those and to see how that would offer information in relation to the question. And then just like we did on the other side, you could take a look at the immediate 3 cards that are immediately touching her. So in this case, we have book, we have rider, and we have whip below her. So if we go with the idea, just like I did with gentleman, if we take a look at book, and book is about knowledge, then here we have some prior knowledge, or something maybe that the lady has undergone in terms of a project that maybe she is no longer actively involved with because her back is to that. It could also be maybe some aspect of her past that she is wanting to keep under wraps, because book could serve twofold. That could be knowledge, but that could also be a secret or a mystery. But it could also be, maybe more metaphorically, there's a chapter in her life that has come to a close because book is closed and she's moving on, right? And then the other thing could be describing the woman. This could be a woman who's also a card reader, right? So those are aspects. Then with the whip right below her, the first thing that's coming to me is that, this card in relation to being a reader, this could be about training or discipline, or needing to work through or sort out something maybe in relation to that. Some sort of conflict, because whip can be about conflict, and this could be some sort of repetitive conflict that she's trying to understand because she's standing on top of that. Usually I tend to look at defeat metaphorically as something that we are understanding. So it could be like she's trying to understand this situation. She's trying to sort through that and work that out, especially if she finds herself repeatedly having this particular kind of challenge. So there is that to consider. And then rider, going with book could be news or messages coming from the cards, and then with whip next to rider, this could be repetitive messages. This would be news and messages that repeat, or news and messages that we are trying to sort out, because we're experiencing some conflict. So that's how I would look at those in relation to this scenario that we're talking about working through the cards when they're in tricky spots. Now we could go back over to the other side and do the same with gentlemen. And so just like lady, Now he is facing all these other cards. I'm sorry, he has his back to all these other cards. So again, this is reinforcing the idea like these are all things that are behind him. And again, he has no cards that he's facing, so there's no future to take a look at. So again, we would do the same thing. We could take these immediate 3 cards and look at those. We could take the diagonal and look at those. We could take the column that he is standing on top of and take a look at that. So that is how I would approach looking at the cards when the significators are in 1 or 2 corners on the top of the tableau. So now let's move on and take a look at what possibilities could happen if the significator is at the bottom end of the tableau. And here we are with the first of 2 possibilities when the significator is in the bottom end of the tableau. So what I did was I took up the cards and I shuffled them and I laid them out in another tableau, so we're not looking at the same tableau that we looked at previously. So in this possibility, we have the lady card. I'm going to stick with that as the focus. So here we have the lady card in the bottom left corner of the tableau. So again, because she's facing to the right, we have cards that represent the future because she's facing this row. So we could look at that as opening up possibilities for the future. Again, her back is to the left and there are no cards there, so we don't have any cards that could be indicative of the past, right? The only difference here is that since she's at the bottom tableau, or bottom of the tableau, I should say, excuse me, then she has all these cards that are above her. When I'm reading a tableau, I tend to look at the cards that are above the significator 2 ways. Number 1, it could represent what's on her mind, and I would tend to look at the more immediate cards that are above her as being reflective of what's on her mind. But it could also be to, like, she is under a great deal of burden, weight, or she's got a lot of things weighing on her because all these cards are literally above her head, right? So that's a couple of ways you want to look at that. You want to look at when the significator is at the top, it usually represents overcoming a lot, or a lot of unconscious or underlying influences in relation to the question. But here I would tend to look at it differently. There's a lot of factors or influences that are weighing heavily on her in relation to the situation or the question. So what we could do is we could take a look at the immediate cards, because we still can do some aspect of a 9 card. We don't have all the cards to fill out a 9 card because we don't have cards that are on the left, and we don't have a couple of cards that would make up the 9 card on the bottom. But we do have 3 cards that are immediately touching her. So we could look at the house because the house is immediately above her. We have the book again, so even though I reshuffled the cards, she's still in close proximity to the book as she was in the previous scenario. And then we have tower immediately to her right. So there is that. So we could look at those. We could also still look at the diagonal. She's got a diagonal. We would look at book, ring, and stars as a possibility for the diagonal. In this particular case, if we go with the idea, still the same scenario, if a woman is a reader or is a woman who's looking at learning to read the cards, then ring coming after that would be there has to be some level of commitment to the process, and then commitment to her end goal. I tend to look at stars as an end goal. And remember, stars was in the previous scenario in the same row, by the way, but it also indicates for me, like I said, divination. So it could be clarity. I tend to look at stars as a clarity card, so clarity around this whole concept of divination. But the chief thing here would be it's about learning and having a commitment to the process, So I'm seeing that. So the best thing to help the ladies who asked me about how would you look at cards in a tricky spot would be you're learning, but you also have to be committed to working around it, because the ring in that regard represents something that happens in cycles or something that could be circular. So it could be something that's recurring. So it's going to happen from time to time, and you get to choose how you're going to handle that, right? But in terms of understanding it, you have to be committed to seeking clarity around that. But again, stars being divination, and book and stars mirror each other. It's just about, this idea about divination through cards. But here's the thing, it's about being committed to the process. It's about forming a deeper connection or relationship to the cards. And that's going to help get clarity and direction and help you navigate through possible challenge, right? So that's another way of bringing this diagonal, again being random, back to the topic that we've been exploring. So there is that. So what I would do is I would look at the cards immediately above her. So we have house, that could be on her mind. So here we have a situation that may be close to home. She may be thinking about her home life. She may be thinking about a family related situation. She may actually be thinking about real estate or property given the literal context of Lenormand. So that could be something having to do with real estate or property. It's something that she's thinking about. But now here's the thing. And again, this was random. So here we have the gentleman card, you know, coming right after house. So it could be a personal situation with a man, could be the man that she lives with that's on her mind. So this could be, you know, partner, husband, spouse. I tend to look at house in this regard as somebody that we share living space with. So there may be a situation involving her partner or her husband that is on her mind. And it could be, again, playing with the idea that all the cards are above her. This could be weighing heavily on her, right? And then the card immediately above that is the crossroads. So for her, it could be making a choice or decision around something having to do with the man that she lives with, right? So that would be how I would read this. But now here's interesting. We have a twofer. So now we also have the crossroads above the gentleman, right? So now that could be something that's also on his mind. You know, it could be he may be thinking about a choice or a decision that he has to make. You know, he could be thinking about a choice or decision that's going to allow him to move forward, because they tend to look at crossroads as choosing the best course possible, right? So again, we have it with the lady if we read this about the lady, but we also have the same card for the gentleman, right? And then with the house card being between them, it could also be a similar situation if we just reverse the scenario and look at the different significator cards. We might come to the same conclusion, but in a different way. So, but it's very interesting how that kind of plays out. So that is how I would look at the cards when the significator is on the left-hand side on the bottom of a tableau. So now let's look at the next possibility. So now here we have the same tableau. All I've done is I've just reversed the position of the lady card. So what I did was I moved her from the left side corner to the bottom right corner of the tableau. So here we have the lady card. And so now you'll note that she is now facing to the right, and there are no cards to her immediate right, which means that, again, we're looking at a situation just like in the very first scenario when we first opened this up, is that all the cards that are behind her represent the past. So this row is the past. So again, bouquet being the closest card to her could represent the immediate past, and then one card out would become more distant past. So there is that. But again, there's no future-oriented card. So again, somebody who's asking a question about the future, this is a tableau that might not work for them because there are no cards to the right. Again, because she's at the bottom of the tableau, this would be all the things that could be weighing heavily on her. She's got a lot on her mind. There are a lot of influences that are weighing heavy on her. Could be creating a burden, that kind of thing. Again, we have this column. So here we have things that could be potentially on her mind, right? And so taking a look at that, we have letter above her. So letter could be a card of written correspondence. So she may have something having to do with maybe paperwork or documentation on her mind. Key, the next card up, for me represents something important. So there may be something important in terms of paperwork or documentation. She could be seeking an answer, and she may get the answer through some sort of paperwork or documentation, but it's on her mind. You know, maybe she's waiting for an answer or a solution to come to her, but it may be in written form. It could also be, too, the importance of something being written or the discovery of something through writing, because they tend to look at key as a discovery card. So it could be, you know, something being discovered, but it's through written correspondence or some sort of paperwork or documentation. So there is that. And then ship, the last card here, you know, ship is a travel card. So it could be saying too, like maybe this documentation has to get to her. So that could be something that's being shipped. And she may be thinking about it because she's waiting for that to arrive. That's just something that's just coming to me off the top of my head. But that is a possibility with that. Again, we could look at the immediate cards that are touching her. So here we have letter, which I've already discussed. Then we have cross. And then we have bouquet right behind her. So opening this up, if we were to read it as a 9 card, let's say, for me, this could be opening things up. So there's some sort of difficulty, some sort of crisis or ordeal. That's how I tend to read cross. So crisis, ordeal, some sort of burden, some sort of responsibility, something of that nature. And so it could be that there may be some sort of crisis or ordeal having to do with paperwork or documentation if I pair the 2 cards. And then with bouquet being immediately behind her, this could be some sort of surprise. You know, she recently had some sort of surprise, and that would play into the part that her back is to bouquet, so she didn't see it coming, right? So it's a surprise from her past that she didn't see coming. Or it could be, if we go with the idea that letter is something in writing or something having to do with paperwork or documentation, or even, you know, an actual letter or mail, then bouquet could be, you know, some kind of invitation or some kind of award or some kind of acknowledgement, something that she may have received through writing. You know, so there is that to consider as possibilities. But you would want to take a look at the immediate cards that are touching the significator card. And then the last thing you want to take a look at possibly would be, there's a diagonal here, and in this particular case we have lady, we have cross, clouds, and whip. So the first thing that I want to say is that all 3 of those cards are challenging cards, right? So you could play off on that. That would kind of go along with the idea that there's a lot weighing on her, you know, or there's maybe a lot that she feels burdened by, and you could just use these 3 cards as a way of offering proof of that or validation of that. So that is how I would look at the cards if the significator is in the bottom right and facing empty space. The only other thing that you could do in this scenario, and this would be especially if the cards are either in the bottom right or the top left, and I didn't mention this, or top right, I should say, excuse me, and I didn't mention this before. You could pick up the cards, especially if the question has to do with something pertaining to the future, and reshuffle the cards and relay another tableau, meaning that you lay out the cards again, and you want to see where the significator card falls the second time you lay out the cards. Now, my own personal experience, what I do is if I feel inclined to do that, and 9 times out of 10 I will, because again, the person who's having the reading done doesn't want a whole lot of past information there. They want to know something about the future. But what I do is I still go through the tableau to some degree and give them some information, and then what I do is I pick the cards up and lay out another tableau. And then we want to make it a note of the difference, like where does the significator fall in the tableau the second time around, right? So there is that to consider. So you could stick with the tableau as it is and work through it, or you could make the choice to pick up the cards and lay out another tableau. So that is how I look at the cards when they are in, we talked about top left, top right, bottom right. So now there's one other possible scenario, and I'm going to take a moment to reshuffle the cards and lay out another example, and that will be how we wrap up this video. All right, and so now we're going to talk about the last possibility you could experience with the significator being in a tricky position in the tableau. So in previous segments of this video, we looked at the top left, we looked at the bottom left in terms of where the significator could fall. We also looked at the top right and the bottom right in the same manner. And so now I want to talk about what would happen if the significator falls in the essence line. And so now this is only if you read a tableau using the 8x4 plus 4, which is 4 rows of 8, and then the 4 remaining cards form the essence line. Some people call this the fate line, the destiny line. I tend to call it the essence line. It's all the same thing, just different words. But if you work with a 9x4, which would be 4 rows of 9, you wouldn't have the essence line. So for me, based on my own personal experience, whenever the significator card falls in the essence line, for me that is indicative of two things. First thing is, this is actually how, when I read the tableau, this is actually the tableau. The first 32 cards are actually the tableau. So going with that as a visual, the fact that the 4 cards are not a part of the tableau, it says to me that the situation, the person is being asked to look at the bigger picture of the situation, because the significator card is out of tableau. So that is how I visually look at that. We're taking a look at the bigger picture. So the person is being asked to, from a visual standpoint, to step outside of the situation so they could take a look at it from a different perspective. That is how I look at that possibility, right? So in this scenario, we have the lady card out of tableau, and she is facing to the right. So the 3 cards that make up the rest of the essence line could be things that are coming up in the near future for her, because she is facing those, right? And so here's another interesting thing, which turned out to be a theme of this video. And again, these tableaus that I threw down were all shuffled and drawn at random. But here we have the gentleman card again. So the gentleman and the lady card are finding themselves in close proximity to each other, even though we've laid out the tableau in different ways. So again, we have the gentleman card. So we have another significator card here. So depending on the gender of the person who the reading is for, we would take a look at the lady card if it was a woman, or the gentleman card if it was a man. But we have the same thing here. We have the possibility here that the gentleman is also being asked to take a look at the bigger picture, so to speak, because this card is also out of tableau. So that is one possibility. The other possibility, and I have had this from personal experience, when the significator card is in the essence line, this line is actually the answer to the question. So even though we have all these other cards to consider and different ways of looking at them, you know, we could look at the first 3 cards, we could look at the corners, you know, we could do knighting, all of that stuff, and that would still offer important information, right, because you don't want to overlook any of that. But in my personal experience, when the significator card is in the essence line, this line is actually the answer to the question. So you want to give particular attention and focus to the message that's in this line. So just as a scenario, here we have an interesting dichotomy, because we have the woman and the man. And then we also have the ship, which is a card of movement. And then we have anchor, which is a card of stability. So it's very interesting that we have this situation, maybe, you know, this moving on and staying put kind of scenario between the man and the woman that they're having to work out. The ship card being between them could be something having to do with travel between a man and a woman. It could be that a woman is traveling to see a man, right? Meaning like she's the one who's putting the effort into movement, and his energy is into staying put because anchor is closest to him, right? It could also be that a woman is traveling to see a man and it pertains to work, because anchor is my work card. So there is that. It could be that a woman is planning to go overseas and the man is kind of landlocked for whatever the reason, because the anchor represents something that's fixed, something that's in place, something that's not moving. So again, if we were talking about a relationship scenario, it could be saying too, like the woman is making effort for the relationship to progress because she is moving towards the man. And it could be saying too, like she may be putting more effort into the progress or seeing some movement with this relationship than maybe the man is. Those just possibilities. Again, you would want to read with the context of the question in mind, but I'm just looking at that just from a general standpoint. But again, essence line for me would be the answer to the question may be directly in this line when the significator falls there. So on that note, I will go ahead and close and wrap up this video. So for Jay Neff and all the other people who had asked me at some point about this particular topic, I hope that you have found this video to be helpful and informative in terms of your work with the cards. So on that note, again, I'm James Himm Mitchell. And as I close, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day. And until we get together in this space in the future, Take care.